All right, what's up everyone? This is Ryan here, and you are watching episode 31 of my Android developer livestream Q&A cast. So this is actually going to be the last episode of the year, but I'll get to that in a moment. Also, I do apologize. The reason why the lighting isn't so good, and also a small part of the reason why I'm taking a break from doing the Q&A episodes, is because the sun's not quite up yet, because I live in Canada and we're friggin' near the North Pole. So anyways, the lighting will get better as the sun decides to make its way over the horizon. With this current lighting, it kind of looks like someone beat the shit out of me, but I can assure you this is just from being tired. These aren't bruises. Anyways, let's get started here. So, yes, first and foremost, I would just like to thank the following people for supporting me on Patreon. So that's going to be Seth Keegan, Trevor Halvorsen, Bassam Halal, Tina Fredericks, Nanotech, Shadow, Mr. Bidwell, Graham Herzeg, Sushil Chanda, Elad Stavi, and Shoku Mustofi. So to those people, I say thank you very much. And if you like what I do here, please consider throw me a couple buck on Patreon or PayPal, or if you'd like sort of a beginner introduction to Android development and like a roadmap if you're kind of a beginner, consider picking up my beginner ebook, which is available in the description box down below. And there's a preview link for it if you want to have a look at what you're getting into. But basically the ebook covers pretty much everything, or as much as I was able to fit into a smallish ebook at one time. Basically everything I wanted to know sort of as a beginner developer, or everything that I would have wanted to know. So definitely consider checking it out. And with that, we will get on to announcements after I find my live stream dashboard. That would help. I guess I should probably have that open so that I can listen to people's questions. So bonjour, comment ça va? So I'm going to check that question in a minute, Monique, but I see you're there. So announcements. There's really only, I guess, kind of one big one for today. So just so everyone's aware, I'm not going to be doing a stream for the rest of December, the Q&A stream. So I'll just write that down here. So there will be no Q&A live streams until the new year. So basically, if I check my calendar here, so basically there won't be a stream on the 24th or the 31st of December. If you're curious and you kind of enjoy these things, just check with me around the 31st as to whether I'll be doing a stream the following week. And there's a couple things. So for starters, it is the holiday season, and there will be at least one Sunday that I'm just not in my office space here, I'll call it. So there's one day where I'm just not going to be able to do the stream at all. But the main reason why I'm going to be taking a break, and at the longest I'll take like a month off and start the stream again halfway through January. But the basic reason for it is I'm just going to have to take a bit of a break and catch up on some of my own learning and do that kind of stuff. And what I wanted to do is, by the time I get to halfway through January, I'm going to be equipped, hopefully, to answer questions on Kotlin and some other more advanced topics like that. So basically, I want to take a break from doing the Q&A just so I can improve my own learning and so that I can help you guys and girls better. And I've got a lot of stuff planned for the new year. Primarily, there will be a lot of Kotlin content coming out. I'm halfway through the next video on my REST tutorial, and I'm going to be finishing that off certainly by the end of this week. And so basically, the REST tutorial that I made, that's probably going to be the last Java tutorial I do for quite a while, and all the rest of the stuff is going to be in Kotlin. So I think that's enough rambling for now. Let's go ahead and get started here. So, okay, so let's see here. So so this question, I'm gonna try and, I might need a little more information, Monique, but the basic gist of this question is, so how to use getPosition. So that would probably be getAdapterPosition. How to use getAdapterPosition, is that correct? Let me just pull up the code here, and am I in? Okay, I'm just trying to decipher the question a little bit here. So let's hop into a Recyclerview, because it's definitely a Recyclerview question. And if I recall correctly, it's getAdapterPosition. Yep, getAdapterPosition. Okay, so how do we use that? There's also getLayoutPosition, but you don't always necessarily need that. How do we use getPosition? Because when we click the item in the Recyclerview, oh, so you click on an item and go to maybe a new activity. If you could just confirm this, so you click on the item, go to a new activity, or something happens, and then when you hit back, you want to jump to the position of the previously clicked item. I think that's basically what you need. The difficulty is if I don't know kind of exactly where you're going, it's hard for me to answer the question. Like, are you opening a new activity when you click the item? What is the item click opening, and what are you going back to is the main thing. So off the top of my head, there is a, you're probably already aware of this, but there's methods on the Recyclerview to sort of fling it to specific positions. So that might be how you would go about doing that. I'm going to see if I can pull up, I don't remember the method name off the top of my head, but I'll see if I can find it. So that's going to be Recyclerview. I'm sure if I look up the docs, I'll recognize it. Where is it? Find, fling, where are we? Get baseline. I feel like there's a method where you can just, yeah. Or it doesn't have smooth scroll. I feel like that's a thing. Smooth scroll. Okay, I think that's what I want. Smooth scroll to position. So I'm just going to bring over the Recyclerview docs. Okay, so awesome. Okay, so Monique has confirmed. So basically what's happening, so Monique has a Recyclerview. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And Monique has a Recyclerview which opens a new activity on click, is the question. I'm not sure why. I'm so used to writing code that I like randomly capitalize words now and do stuff like that. It's like, here's a really quick aside. When I wrote the Android ebook, my capitalization was just so horrible because I'm fairly good at writing. Like, my mom has a degree in English. I've got a pretty damn good vocabulary. Like, I can make it through Christopher Hitchens' work, and that requires a really good vocabulary. But anyways, I totally forgot why I was telling that random anecdote. But, all right, just because I'm so used to coding that I would just randomly capitalize like almost every noun in the ebook, and I had to go back and change so many. Anyways, random tangent. So Monique has a Recyclerview which opens a new activity on click. Monique, yeah. It's like I'm telling it as a story, sorry. Monique would like to return to the position of the clicked item, I can't spell, on back press. So basically, I think I've understood this great. So you hit an item in the Recyclerview, opens a new activity, you want to hit back, takes you back to the old activity, and then scroll to that original position. So off the top of my head, Well, here's a quick solution. Yeah, I'll just go with the quick solution for now, just to give you a quick idea. If I thought about this longer, I could probably think of a more elegant solution. But so a quick solution. So pass the position of the item essentially between the two activities as an extra. You'll want to check if extras exist or don't exist, because obviously sometimes you're going to be calling the list activity without a specific position, like if it just opens from fresh. So like don't, be prepared to like check if it's null. So you can pass it to the new activity. The thing is, you're going to have to like, here's the main, well, let me finish the next thing. When you reload the list activity with the position extra, set up Recyclerview like normal, and then use smooth scroll to position. So let's see here. So this is one of the methods. So you can, this is in the Recyclerview. This is the Recyclerview documentation, smooth scroll. So the method I would suggest, so the main problem is you're going to have to figure out a way to pass the position around or maintain it, persist it. But the method you're going to want to probably use is smooth scroll to position. And this will sort of scroll your Recyclerview to the specific position, just like it says. So of course the difficulty, like the challenge with this thing is you're going to have some way of storing the position, of course. Now there's different ways you could handle that. Probably what I'm used to doing as a quick solution would, and it's, I don't know, it's not a super elegant solution, but pass the extra between the two activities, the position as an int extra, and that would be one quick way to solve it. Maybe another way is you could use like shared preferences or something, but all you really need to do is you need to maintain that position between, the flow of the application that you're trying to solve, and ultimately that'll come down to whichever kind of way you decide to store the position. So hopefully that helps. I think I've given a vague idea here. Extras would probably be the quickest, easiest way to do it. So hopefully that answers the question. Oh, you tried intent, but it didn't work? Maybe it was the way you were doing it. Oh yeah, I wouldn't, generally I wouldn't advise, yeah. Well, I've, like the thing is, I've implemented the solution with extras before, so maybe if possible open a Stack Overflow or hit me up on the Slack channel. By the way, I have a Slack channel if anyone's wants to ramble at me over the holiday season. Link down in the description box. I've laid out what I think is a basic solution. Where it looks like you've got an implementation error that I'd have to look into, but there's different, like ultimately at the end of the day, of course, the problem is you need some way of maintaining that position, and that's really going to depend on how you've set things up. So anyways, moving on. Okay, so sharing a model between retrofit and room. So I'm gonna try and spend a minute unpacking that model. So I'm going to assume you mean, let's go to Android. I forgot to open my REST tutorial application. Let's pull this thing into view. So if I'm correct, what you're asking is you want to be able to send a, let's see here, like a data model class. So you want to be able to use it with retrofit and room. So I don't really see why you couldn't do that. I'm just trying to, okay. Should I use an interface for this somehow? So again, here's the thing, Alex. It's difficult for me to answer your question because, again, like, it depends on how you've set your back end up. I think what you're asking is essentially you've got a room, we'll just call it a room service, and you've got a retrofit service, and you're wondering if you should use the same data model class for both of them, or Pojo or whatever. Except in this case, it probably wouldn't technically be called a Pojo anymore. I don't know. I don't have like a straightforward answer there. Like, honestly, it would depend on. So the difficulty, well, I don't know. Yeah, that's a really. Could you do it? Absolutely, is what I'm kind of getting at here. Is it a good idea? I haven't really tried. So as a general rule, like, you generally want your data model to be sort of tailored to whatever service you're working with. And then when it goes back to the presenter or use case, which is part of the problem, there's so many different ways to do this, which is why it's hard for me to have a specific answer here. But as a general rule, if you've got a data model which has a whole bunch of stuff that's specific to two separate services, and it's like a big class that's tightly coupled, you'd probably want to separate it, and then in your presenter or use case or repository or whatever you're kind of doing, then you could sort of map it to maybe something more appropriate for the view. But whether you really need to have a separate model for those things, I couldn't tell you right off the bat. Like, because the thing about it is that you can use your whatever JSON parsing library. Most of them will allow you to like map from like an ugly JSON REST field name to a nice Java name, and then maybe that would be easy. But probably what would happen is you would have one data model class that would be filled up with a whole bunch of annotations. Honestly, like, my only answer would be you're just like test out either approach and see which works better. I haven't specifically tried to do that, so I can't tell you off the top of my head what's better. But yeah, that was probably a very vague answer. But again, like, I need to see more information before I can make a super specific answer there. Let's see here. Oh, I see you followed up and I didn't read that. So SQLite syntax. Yeah, it's tough, Alex, because I need to really know how you set things up. So between a thread and a handler thread. Oh, okay. I'm gonna try and. Okay, maybe I can help you here. So we've got a question about threads and stuff like that. So this is actually something I do. Whoa, which? I'm in the wrong scene there. So this is actually something I talk about in my ebook, but I will talk about it today. This question's by, is it Iman or Imen? Imen, sorry. So, what's the difference between thread, handler, handler thread. So here's, so here's the thing about this question. So it looks like you're familiar with the basic concept of what a thread is. I'm gonna level with you here. I haven't really worked with thread and handler thread the way probably it's recommended by stock Android framework solutions. I generally handle all kinds of threading and that management through RxJava. So, off the top of my head, like, I couldn't really explain, I couldn't really explain the inner workings of these different classes, but suffice it to say that a big reason why I avoided learning them was exactly the issue you have, which is that a lot of these things have, starting out early on, I looked into a lot of these things as a beginner, and the explanations in the documentation really didn't explain what I actually used them for and what their specific use cases were. And it just so turns out that I have never really had to use them. So the thing about that is you do need some way of managing what do you call that? Concurrency in your application, of course. And this is really where I would suggest you learn RxJava. So I understand that's kind of a crappy answer because I'm not actually explaining like the finer details of these things. But at the end of the day, like, thread, of course, is just, you seem to be aware of what a thread is. What I'll do, let me just, this is maybe a little bit peripheral to your question, but I wanted to explain, like, to any beginners out there, what exactly is a thread? And I use an analogy in my ebook, which is basically like so. So let's say you're running a coffee shop. You work at a coffee shop, and at the moment let's say on one day you're short-staffed. You're only one person, and that one person, you have the responsibility of taking orders, making coffee, whatever, grabbing sandwiches. You've got a whole bunch of stuff you have to do, and then you get a rush, and there's like a big lineup of customers. And so if you've only got one person, one thread, sort of managing all these different tasks, then you're going to get situations where people aren't happy. Your customers are going to basically get tired of waiting, and the service isn't going to be very good, and you're going to get bad reviews. That's analogous to programming. If you do everything on one thread, particularly database and like network operations, then your application's going to hang and become unresponsive, so you're going to get bad reviews. I'm kind of proud of that analogy. And where you can introduce a solution is to basically, I would think of it like create a second thread or a second employee. So this second employee makes the drinks. That's their job. And then you just take the orders. And then all of a sudden you've got the UI, the front end, taking the orders and sort of keeping that part moving. And then you've got a thread in the background which is making the orders and returning them. So ultimately that's what a thread is. So thread handler and handler thread are going to be like at the highest level. I'm assuming you understand what a thread is. A handler is going to be a class which listens to these threads. Now the way that I sort of solve that in my applications is I use RxJava, which allows you to just like really quickly, where's a quick reference here. So for example, let's go to the repo list presenter. So like for example with RxJava, this is just in the Android REST tutorial project down below. You can tell it like, hey, I want to listen to the response of this method here, get user repositories from the data source. I want to listen to that on the UI thread, but where's the repository? But if I go to the repository, I just tell it down here, but I want this work to be done on the IO thread. So essentially, and it's going to automatically, because I configured it to, it's not automatically, it's going to call back to the main thread. So anyways, I didn't really answer your question. I do apologize about that, but the reason for it is I don't really like working with those classes because I found them very, very annoying and kind of, I didn't find any easy explanations of how to use them. Maybe they are pretty easy to use, and it's that I went the route of RxJava. Or earlier on, I just used async task. Oop, microphone's falling out. Okay, anyways, let's move on. Probably not the best answer there, but hopefully I at least gave some thoughts. Okay. So, oh, well, Darrell, like, you can call smooth stroll later. Like, I don't see why that would be, like, I've implemented that solution before, passing the position between activities via extra. Like, you can do that. Again, it's a quick and dirty solution. Taran asks what Google's Flutter is. I don't know what that is. Offline caching is apparently what it is. Interesting. I'll look into it. I haven't really... so the question was like, will Flutter replace mainstream development? I would need to look at it a little bit closer, but I doubt it, but I need to actually know what it is before I could. Yeah. So, any more? I basically run out of questions here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to run a quick commercial break, and I might ramble about a question which, or just sort of ramble, share my thoughts on a question we had in the Slack channel. But anyways, just going to run a quick commercial break here. Anyways, Tina asks if my future tutorials are going to be in Kotlin. That is absolutely true. Starting next year. Flutter in Kotlin. Looks like I need to look up what Flutter is, because yeah, basically, so I get this question quite a bit. Am I going to be doing tutorials in Kotlin? Yeah, basically my response to that is pretty much this is probably the last year that I will prioritize Java, certainly. I'm going to be writing in Kotlin. Basically, the last project I'm working on in Java is the Android REST tutorial, and that's very close to being done. So, and then the next application. So the first thing I plan to do is I'm going to basically make this is what I generally advise people to do. So I'm going to build a simple application using Kotlin, but I'm going to like really over-architect it. A lot of people it seems to irritate a lot of people when I build something like a simple app with a really complicated architecture. It's a really funny thing to me, because the reason why I like, so let me ramble for a bit because I don't seem to have much questions. One of the biggest tools that I've learned to employ when I'm learning new technologies or even a new language like Kotlin is, my general advice is you want to try and pick a project which is going to force you to learn the basics of the framework or language you're learning, but you don't actually want difficult programming problems to solve per se when you're learning the basics, because your goal is kind of to build the sort of the fundamental skills that you need to build. So if you over architect and do a really, really good job with a small app, you're going to, in my opinion, learn most of the stuff you need to know and then worry less about the normal problems that you would need to solve in a new application you're writing. And then from there, so once that's complete, then I'll basically be building a more advanced project in Kotlin. And basically by that point, I want my architecture and framework usage basically, obviously the industry changes every like 3 months nowadays, but that's basically where I'm going to draw the line and sit and finally make a decision. This is how I want to build applications. As a quick, one quick aside, I finished off my diagram this morning, which I was showing everyone a little while earlier. Where is it? Pictures. All right, so for anyone curious, so this is kind of, can I full screen this, or is it just going to be annoying the whole time? So for anyone curious, this is, oh, that's a little bit out of view. This is basically like how I will be building, how I build applications nowadays on Android. And essentially how it works is, of course, we've got the application, we've got an activity, and then, so that's, of course, going to contain my fragment and presenter. And I'm actually going to pass, there's kind of a trick that happens here with the dependency injection framework. And kind of how that works is I pass in like this repository object. I actually pass it into like the presenter, and then the presenter creates this use case because I wanted to avoid using dependency injection into the use cases because I forget exactly why. I know Durel probably remembers the reason why, but you generally want to keep your use cases devoid of framework code. Except in this case, RxJava. But anyways, longer story shorter, so I basically use dependency injection with Dagger 2, in my case, to deal with the constructing my local and remote APIs and all that kind of stuff, and creating the repository or any kind of system service. And this is essentially how things are going to function with my applications, or how they currently do. Now, one thing that got brought up in the Slack channel earlier was discussion on, so the way I like to build apps, and this is not necessarily the only way to do it, is I like to have basically for every feature of the application an activity, a fragment, a presenter, and whatever use cases it needs. I like doing that because to me it's good separation of concerns. I can use activities for things like on activity results. So let's say I send let's say I'm using Facebook login API or something like that. Or if I want to use like the camera, I forget what you call that, but it's when you use an external application to get some kind of data and then it calls back to your application in on activity result. Start activity for result, I think is the method you call. So I like doing that, but the one alternative approach which was suggested in the Slack channel, and apparently Jake Wharton is quite fond of this, and generally when he's fond of something you want to at least look into it, but you can also have, say for example, just one single activity for the entire application, and then say I'm assuming for each, feature, like maybe a fragment, a presenter, and whatever, Or you could do something like my friend Durel does. He'll even sometimes have like sub-presenters and sort of sub-views and stuff like that. So there's lots of ways to do it, but as to what is the most effective way, I really think the only way to kind of figure that out, other than just, you know, learning about what are, just thinking about it, is to actually build the thing and be like, okay, so this way of doing it gives me these benefits, but it also gives me these deficits and stuff like that. So just interesting stuff to think about. Anyways, let's get back to questions. Oh, that's okay. Okay, oh, I see. So Google's creating like a crazy new JavaScript library. Okay, so I've got a question from Jamie, which was asked in the previous episode, and unfortunately, last episode, I forgot what the question was, so I was going to try and prepare for it today. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up, apparently Jamie's gotten back to me on the Slack channel. I'm going to see if I can answer it off the top of my head, because I feel like it was one of those questions that I needed some time to think about, but let's see if I can get to it. So, and no worries about responding late. It's all good. Oh, that would, yeah. I would need to research that. I'm sorry, man. I'll message you back, because it's a good question. You know, I'll ask the question, and we've got a lot of good developers, so there's a good chance someone will be able to help you with this. So the question was, so the question was like, how should I go about storing an API key if you don't want to hard code it for security reasons, and you don't have the resources to set up a server? So that wasn't the thing about this. So here's the question here. So the thing about this is I've never actually, you know, kind of bothered to do that. So I'm trying to think like, I'd be curious as to why. Like, I understand if you're sharing your project on GitHub or something like that, you don't want your API keys to just be publicly visible there. So the thing I'd be wondering is kind of like, I think it would depend on who you're giving access to your project. Yeah, I'm just going to throw that question out there in case there's anyone who wants to respond to that in the chat for Jamie, and I'd have to really think about it. Like, there's different stuff you could do. You could maybe... the thing that's popping into my head is you could use like build variants and product flavors possibly, but that doesn't really solve the problem if you don't want to hard code it. Like, I'm just trying to think... it shouldn't be generally visible even if it's hard-coded in your project unless you're like sharing it or something, or I'm just totally missing some security concern, which is totally possible. I'm not the best with Android security. Like, the way that I deal with security so far in my applications is I just don't store sensitive data from my users. So, so it's unfortunately not something I'm very well versed in, but I don't know, maybe we'll have some people Okay. Yeah, you'd probably... Yeah, you're gonna, like, as Durel says, you're gonna want to use some kind of encryption for it. Um, yeah, it's just not something I'm really the best person to ask about it. So, but I'll still try and get back to you later. Um, see, a lot of people are suggesting don't include it in the repository, but I don't think that's exactly what Jamie's asking, although I do agree with that. Jamie appears to be referring specifically if someone tries to decompile your application, and I'm not familiar with that process, how easy it is to do, and how much, yeah, it would... Yeah, it's an interesting question. Anyways, I'm going to kind of... Well, I'll try and move on, but I don't really have many questions. Definitely not the person to ask about best Android books either. Yeah, no worries, Jamie. Sorry I couldn't help you right off the bat. Anyways, well, I can just start rambling about stuff. What can I ramble about? I guess I'll just talk a little bit about the new year for a little while and what I'm kind of planning for content. So obviously, like, there was a long stretch there where I didn't create a whole lot of video content, and that was mostly taken up dealing with the ebook. And then pretty much since then, it's been a couple of other projects. Like, I had to deal with a major website overhaul, and a friend of mine very kindly helped with that, and then I've been helping her with Android work consequently. And then I've also been, of course, doing the REST tutorial and improving my knowledge of RxJava and Dagger 2. And basically, it's all kind of set up for next year. Next year, so here's this is maybe something worth rambling about. One thing that I've learned this year is that our jobs as developers, you know, it's historically been a profession where you need to constantly learn and constantly deal with new APIs and new concepts and new languages and new platforms. And you really have to do that if you want to be sort of always on the cutting edge, which is it can be difficult. Once you are familiar with a framework that handles a certain problem, a lot of times it's easier to pick up the new framework. Like, for example, if you're familiar with RxJava, then live data should be real easy for you. But the thing that I'm realizing pretty quickly, unfortunately, is I want to learn Kotlin, but as far as my job as an Android-specific developer, I kind of think that's going to be disappearing pretty quickly. And so it's really something that's made me think about what I'm going to be getting into in a year's time, because I'm not saying I'm quitting Android. I love Android and I'll keep building applications. But mobile development as we know it is just going to change so drastically. Like, so here's a cool experience I had. Last week, I got the chance to meet up and hang out with a fellow, I won't mention his name, but he runs a virtual reality studio, and he's a major nerd just like me, so we got busy. It was a really great experience for me. He talked about all the different developments in virtual reality, and we talked about AI, and it was really great. Every now and again, I'll meet someone, and within like 5 minutes, we're talking about like the cutting edge of technology and really cool frameworks and all that stuff. And it's a real treat because I'm a nerd to the core. I don't care about the weather. I don't care about People magazine. I don't care about Drake. I don't care about pumpkin spice lattes. I care about programming and solving problems and the most important questions that human beings can ask. So, in my opinion. So, anyways, the point I'm trying to get at here, in learning more about that and what I've learned about AI and what I've learned about internet, for example, what is this thing going to be in 5 years? I don't think we're going to be carrying these around in 5 to 10 years so much as like having, you know, a Google Glass thing, because there's new chips coming out. This is part of the stuff I learned from this fellow. Like there's this Snapdragon VR chip and all these different things that are like what's called an SoC, which is a, what was it, system on a chip. Longer story shorter, you're going to have something like as powerful as this in like a Google Glass on the side of your head. So the point I'm trying to get at is when we get to the point where we have free and fast internet everywhere, which hopefully we make it that far and we don't end up blowing ourselves up with like fucking Trump and Kim Jong-il, like those ridiculous morons playing with fire, but hopefully we don't destroy our planet first. But like, here's the thing, when we have really fast internet, why would I write my back end on here? This thing's just going to be a view, and it's probably not even going to look like this. Like, my job as like an Android mobile developer is, in my opinion, I think it's going to change drastically in the next 5 years, primarily because if everyone has fast internet, or most people have fast internet, it doesn't make sense to store all of the applications backend and that kind of stuff on the phone. Just use the phone as a view that fires the click events to the server, and then the server responds with some view to render. So how that affects things, in my opinion, what that means is, as an Android mobile developer, I want to learn web frameworks. I want to know how to write stuff on the web. Like, I would like to try and stick with Kotlin as much as possible and try and build web servers and stuff like that with Kotlin. I don't like JavaScript. I don't like it. I'll deal with it. I'll write it, but I'm not a big. I haven't worked with any major JavaScript libraries. But longer story shorter, I'd really prefer to stick with Kotlin because the legibility and advantages from it, in my opinion, are quite powerful. Anyways, I'm going to stop rambling, but so I just wanted to kind of mention that to everyone, that there's going to be, the hardware is changing so rapidly that it's my personal opinion that in 5 years, what an Android mobile developer actually is, I think, is going to just almost not entirely change, but drastically change. Anyways, I've rambled for quite a while. Let's see here. Oh, so this is a general question. I'm not going to do too many more questions because I'm pretty tired, but so this is a quick question. What language is best to learn in 2018? I would basically say probably, in my opinion, well, it depends on what platform. Like, for me to just say you should pick this one language to learn is silly. So what I would suggest to you, and this echoes what I was saying earlier, in my opinion, it's almost going to become better to learn web development first before Android, which is almost the opposite of what I did. But the nice thing is, I can't answer your question. Your question is, what is the best language to learn in 2018? That's an impossible question to answer. It depends on what you're developing for. However, if you're developing web and Android primarily, you're going to want to learn Kotlin. That's basically it. And that's just my opinion there. So Lord of Conduct is asking if I can use a different theme with a bigger font. I can increase the font size. I'm not going to change the theme. Listen, I know this upsets a lot of people, and a lot of people say that like my dark background with the lighter text, like the Darkula theme, I get maybe, I've had about overall 10 people complain about it. Listen, absolutely, I'll do my best to increase the font size, but I'm not going to change my theme. I actually find Darkula a lot easier on my eyes than the white background. So for all those people who are complaining that it's like harder on the eyes or harder to see, unfortunately for you, I find the opposite is true, and I actually prefer to look at a dark background. And I think you might find when you spend as much time as I do staring at code, having like a bright white background is not actually preferable. But I'll absolutely try and increase the font size, but the theme's not going to change. I like Darkula. Sorry about that. I've never worked with Firebase Cloud Functions, which is apparently a JavaScript library. I worked with Firebase, and I quite like it. But that doesn't really answer your question. Yeah, so you've got a couple people like trying Darkula out on my suggestion, but I would like to see actual research into this, but I would hazard a guess that it's actually a lot better to have a dark background. And people that do complain about eye strain, I don't really agree with that, but maybe there's actual studies that you could look at. But it's funny, like you're either a person that really hates the Darkula theme for some reason, or you're a person who just recognizes that it's not actually that big of a deal and just, deal with it. Let's end on this question. Yeah, so even more people liking Darkula, so whatever. So I'm going to kind of just riff on this one because I haven't actually written extensive unit tests with a model view model architecture. So Tina was asking, does MVP or MVVM lend itself to better unit testing? So this is kind of an interesting question here. This is going to be a little bit speculative on my part. So just to explain this to people, so if I wanted to like basically so I want you to think of this as model view presenter here. Just the front end. Ignore this middle part here, use case. Just think this is the model presenter and this is the view. I've rambled about this a lot, but the only real difference between model view, view model, and model view presenter that is like something I could really just concretely say, here is the main difference, because what people define as model view, view model changes depending on which developer you ask. It's really annoying, to be honest, but the fundamental difference from my understanding is that in model view presenter, the fragment talks to the presenter and the presenter talks to the fragment. They have a dependency. Whereas with model view, view model, let me pull up the other graphic if I can find it. This is my other low budget, low patented low budget Ryan sketch. So this is, oh, that's a camping photo. Anyways, let's get started here. So, so this is the main difference. Are you going to let me zoom in? There we go. So with ModelViewViewModel, as you can see, we no longer have that line between the presenter and the fragment, or what is kind of the presenter type thing. Instead, we have a view model which just exposes live data, and then the fragment observes that data. So the fundamental difference here is that this line is not here. If this was ModelViewPresenter, that line would be there, and then we'd basically just call this thing a presenter. This is one of the issues that I think a lot of people have with, like, they see ModelViewController, they see ModelViewPresenter, they see ModelViewViewModel. I even had a guy go to one of my solid tutorial videos and be like, hey, what you're doing here totally looks like a controller, not a presenter. And I haven't responded to him yet, but I'm basically thinking, like, you, I'm not sure, like, when it comes down to the actual differences between these things, I think we're actually literally talking about, like, one line in an architecture, generally speaking. Or, like, the best I could do to explain the difference between ModelViewController and ModelViewPresenter is that probably with ModelViewPresenter, it goes like view, presenter, model, view, presenter, model, view, presenter, model. Whereas with ModelViewController, you've got like view, or you've got one big controller that talks to multiple views and stuff like that. Like, controller is essentially just going to end up being a much bigger kind of presenter thing. So it's funny, like, people get into debates and arguments about what these things mean, but from my understanding, a lot of times it's just like literally where one line points or one dependency. Anyways, I totally forgot what the question was because I was so busy rambling. Does ModelViewPresenter or ModelViewViewModel lend itself to better unit testing? So in my general experience, I prefer ModelViewPresenter for this. And so the reason why is what I have found, it's going to depend on how you kind of do this. There's ways to do it properly, but in my personal opinion so far, I find ModelViewPresenter easier to test. And the reason why is that I find, so here's concretely, here's what I would say. When our presenter talks and knows about the fragment and its contract, the presenter is necessarily going to become a little more complicated. So there's essentially going to be decisions about how the fragment should kind of draw itself being offloaded into this presenter, whereas in ModelViewViewModel, it's a little more, let me just give you this sort of view model thing, and you're going to decide how to render it, more or less. And this is part of the problem I have with most ModelViewViewModel implementations, is there's almost a necessity for like a presenter or a controller as well, but I'm not going to get into that. I find with ModelViewPresenter, the effect it has is that I need to write more tests. My presenter becomes more complicated. So that's sort of the downside. But the benefit of that is that when I have my presenter telling the view almost everything that it's supposed to do, I can essentially test my view within my unit tests in the presenter, if that kind of makes sense. Because when you boil down the view to basically, here's a click event, and then let me draw this thing on screen, like those are the only things that the view does, it makes it so that you need to test the presenter more, but then you've got like all of your logic kind of in one place. So I really like ModelViewPresenter specifically because I find it the easiest to test. Now, I'm not saying ModelViewViewModel is impossible or difficult to test, but really what I'd like to emphasize here is that there is a deficit to just exposing data to the view, and depending on how you do that, you might end up with a situation where you are putting a fair amount of logic in the view or the fragment, and that's problematic, in my opinion, because then you're going to have to test this thing a little more carefully. Whereas if you kind of do it how I suggest with Model View Presenter, kind of a passive view approach, then I don't even really write espresso tests because my views are so simple that I would basically be testing Android's framework set text method, which is not something I need to test. And then all the sort of view tests that I use is I just test it on the device and test the view like that. So I'm not saying don't write espresso tests, and particularly my approach is easy because I've written fairly simple apps. So if you've got a pretty complicated view hierarchy, maybe it becomes a lot more difficult. But anyways, I feel like I just rambled on that one. But as a general, my consensus is that Model View Presenter is easier to test because your presenter is just more active with the view. And since you're already going to test the presenter with unit tests anyway, I don't mind taking the extra complexity and steps to write a few more unit tests in the presenter. I actually like that because then I'm sort of confining my tests to one sort of specific class. Anyways, I think that's basically it. I'll just check the chat really quick, but oh yeah, yeah. So that here's the thing, Tina. I totally did just save you probably reading like 5 different annoying articles that don't get down to the friggin' point of like, okay, what is actually ModelViewViewModel? What does that mean? And to the best of my understanding, what it means is this line doesn't exist. Instead, this is what happens. So when I show people that, a lot of times it's like, is that really what, like, is that what ModelViewViewModel is? Pretty much. Here, let me end with a really good resource. I would highly suggest this. This was the one article which made things make sense for me, because when I was researching my room, just a funny aside, so when I was doing my room SQLite, sorry, my architecture components and room database tutorial, one of the big long ones I made, it took me like 4 weeks to do the whole tutorial, which sucked. It was a really tough month. And the 2 weeks of that was spent trying to understand what is ModelViewViewModel? How can I explain this to people in simple terms? And the article that finally made it make sense is Martin Fowler, what's it called? A presentation model. So this is the name of a blog post. And this is ModelViewViewModel. MVVM. This presentation model. So here's a quick background about ModelViewViewModel. It wasn't called that originally. I might regret saying this later in my career, but I think ModelViewViewModel is just one of the dumbest fucking names I've ever heard. Pardon my language, sorry. I used to work in kitchens and stuff like that, so I have kind of a potty mouth, but ModelViewViewModel to me is a terrible name in simple terms, and it's not what it was called originally. It was originally called, I think, even application model, but Martin calls it presentation model, and he explains it very simply, which like I explain it with a visual metaphor here. Essentially, this is what it comes down to is a separation of, or a difference in dependencies. Anyways, I think I'm going to stop babbling. Yeah, it's such a terrible name. Like, let me just I have to ramble. The thing that really irritates me, this is my big issue. This thing here, okay, you want to call this thing, here's the thing. If you want to call this model, I don't have a problem. Whatever. Cool. Model responsible for data storage and access. That's a model. Awesome. Great. Not an issue. You want to call the stuff that draws things on screen the view. Not a problem. That makes sense. You could call it UI. You could call it view. You could call it whatever. That's cool. View model. So when I look at this name, when I look at view model, I'm basically thinking, okay, so this class draws things on screen? Or like, okay, I'm being a little bit facetious, but if I had to try and maybe make sense of that name, I would say a representation of the view based. Well, here's the issue. This is the thing. To me, a view model is not whatever the hell. Oops, sorry, wrong thing. A view model is not whatever the hell this little box is here. A view model is a data model class which is tailored for the view. So it's something you can give to the view, and the view just kind of renders it. So let's say you've got, in your backend, you've got a data model that's like, it's got your room annotations or retrofit, and you want to make that into, you want to hide that stuff from your view. So you send a message through your application, you've got your data model over here that's got like your room stuff in it, and then as that data model goes back through to the view, you sort of map that model to a view model. So a view model I would define as a model class, a data model tailored for the view. So where they go from that to a class which publishes data to the view and talks to the model and basically is a communicator class, I don't know how they got to view model. Anyways, I'm going to shut up now. That's everything for now. If you like the show, go ahead and hit the like button down below if you haven't already. And if you don't, that's cool too. Thank you so much, everyone. It's almost been a whole year since I've started doing this live stream Q&A. I'm going to keep doing it. And one thing I wanted to mention, I'm going to take a break from doing my weekly live stream Q&A, but I do plan to do more streaming. And how that's going to work is I'm just going to be working on a couple projects. If you want to join me whenever, you can ask questions. I'll try and take breaks now and again, but I want to be coding and live streaming quite a bit over the holiday season. And it's not going to be like dedicated Q&A format, but I like to be available for people to ask questions. And so you can watch out for my live streams there. Also, consider joining the Slack channel if you want to have access to YSS in our community. Like, we got some awesome developers that help out with questions on the Slack channel and all that kind of stuff. So that's basically it. Thank you so much, everyone. I wish you all, there's all kinds of different things. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa. Unfortunately, I forget the Middle Eastern and Asian traditions, or if there are any around the holiday season, but I'll just say to you, happy holidays. I hope you have a good, I hope you enjoy the frigid winter as much as I'll be. Or of course, you might live in a different place where it doesn't get quite so cold, but anyways, stay warm or keep cool or whatever, and peace out. We'll see you next year.